So you guys have been asking me to try out Svelte in a project, and today I'm going to do that. I'm going to look at the differences between Svelte and Nuxt, and then we're going to create a small app, and I'm going to see how I like it. Hey, also leave a comment below. Tell me what you like, and if you guys like these type of videos. Let's jump in. All right, so here is a Svelte app that I created beforehand, and this is the app that we'll be creating today. It's just a basic to-do app. You can add in some basic to-dos. Walk the dog around the neighborhood, and then it adds it as a task. You can also delete the tasks, as many as you want. And this is powered in the back end using AWS Amplify with AppSync. So I thought, since I'm a huge Vue.js fan, that I will try to create this using SvelteKit. So I'm using the latest SvelteKit as of this recording. So let's just take a look at some code and some features of Svelte that I like. So beforehand, I created a brand new app using Svelte. It's pretty simple. You just use your favorite package manager, and you can just run this npm create svelte latest my app. And then I added in Tailwind, and then I wanted to create a look and feel. So here's the app as it is now. I just added in some inputs and some divs. One thing I really like about Svelte is I don't have to surround this whole thing by a template. I don't have to worry about having multiple root node elements. It just works. And then any values I put inside this script tag at the top will just appear inside here that I need. One feature that I really like is you can have routes. So this very much feels like Nuxt. You can have API routes, but it has this thing called page.server.ts. This allows you to have events or things running on the server, and then these events on the server can be then passed back to the client. So let me show you how that works. So this load event, anytime this page loads up, and since it's on page.server, it's like the root, it'll run. So let me just try this out for a second. So I'm going to return some values. I'm going to return an object, do test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I go back to my page, I now have access to this. All I need to do is do this export let data, and it's just going to automatically, magically have it available. So I'm going to create another H1. If I put in data here, you can see here it already has autocompletes for me, so I can put test. So here's the test right there. And let's just change it here. We'll do class, I don't know, text 6XL. We'll make it blue. Cool, you can see here it is in my app already. And so if this page loads, it automatically appears for me, which is really, really cool. You can do not just this, but I think what's even more interesting is you can have server actions that connect up to your forms. So here's this actions object here. In this form here, you can see here I have a form. It has method equals post. So all these methods that you're using are going to be posts for SvelteKit for these actions. And then I put in the location. So this sort of reminds me of like my PHP days when I had to like submit stuff to a server. So you can add this action create. So now I can create this action in the back end, which is really neat. And it, of course, since it's an input, we have these inputs here, and I have a named input for name and description. I should be able to grab the values from there without having to add in like controlled inputs. I can just have them go directly to the back end. So I have this action here, and we're calling it create. I'm going to create this create. It's going to have in this request object, and this request object will have all the information we need inside of it. So, and nice thing too with SvelteKit, I really enjoy this, is that if you install the correct plugins, so I have a handful of Svelte plugins installed. You just search for Svelte in VS Code. I have the Svelte for VS Code and Svelte IntelliSense. When I ran that the first time, it automatically created it so that way, if I'm on the server, on this page.server.ts, these will actually be auto-completed, and I'll have the IntelliSense completion here on the client side. And also, like this request object here, it already typed it for me. I don't have to type it myself. It just works, which is awesome. So I'm going to return right here, just something really simple. I'm going to do this other, and I don't know, I'm going to do some info. I'm going to see if I can return something from this action. And if I come back here, I actually have access to that action by using this form. So if I do $form, let's see here. Let's do it right. Here it is, other. Come back over here. I'll type something in. It says undefined right now. But if I type something in and submit it, now I see it in here. It refreshed the page, by the way. You can see the URL change, but I had some info. So I was able to grab stuff from the back end. Now, this isn't too useful as is, but let's say we want to grab some of this task and description data out of here. I'm going to do this const data. I'm going to grab request.form data, and this will grab the form data that was submitted over for me. And then let's say I want to grab, I don't know, the description. I can do data.get and then pass in that name that we had in there. So in this case, it would be description. Then we can return it. So let's say we want to return it. We can do other description. Now it is giving me a warning here. Because one thing I forgot to do is you have to await it, and you have to make this async. Otherwise, it won't work. So here it is. I did it, and now it's going to pass the description back to the front end. So I'm going to refresh it. Again, it says undefined, but I'm going to put in task, my task, and description, my description. I'm going to submit it. And you can see here, it passed the value back to the front end, which is really, really neat. Now, one thing I noticed is every time I was doing this, it was refreshing, but you can actually have it not refresh if you want. So I'm going to go back to the page. And you just need to import this thing in here. So I'm going to import at the top. It's called enhnce from $appforms. And this allows you to, it has a bunch of functions, but if you add it to the form, it won't do that. It won't like submit it to this. It still submits it to the server, but doesn't do the refresh of the page. So if I come back over here, I'll just do use and then enhance. And then I'll do it, I'll bring it to the other form too, because I have two forms on this page, I believe. Let's see here, form. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. I'll do use, enhance. Kind of like my last name almost. All right, so I'll save it, and then I'll just delete this out of the URL. And now if I put something in here, task 1, description 1, and hit enter, you can see here, it didn't automatically refresh the page, and it still was able to talk to the server. So that's really powerful. Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking like, now since you're submitting everything to the server, what about validating your inputs and doing all that? Well, of course, you can add into your inputs, your normal HTML required, min length, things like that. If you like, you can also pass failures back from the front end, from the back end. So let's say in this description here, we wanted to verify that it was actually there. So I can do like, if not description, which is probably not the right thing, because then if someone put in null or a falsy value, it would also give you an error. But just for the sake of it, we'll just do it not description. Then we'll return, we'll have this new fail. We'll pass in description and then missing true. And this is an object, I believe. You can put 400. So it's going to return a 400. And then it's going to return back this object. And this fail, you just import it in from SvelteKit. So you can make a whole bunch of ways of do validation on the back end to make sure that the form is correct. And whatever you use, just whenever you're doing validation, you always want to validate not just on the front end, but the back end, because you can't trust the front end at all. So in this case, I'm going to return this missing true. And now I can check to see like if this is correct. So maybe at the top of this form, I'm going to delete this other. I'm going to do a $if. This is just kind of a part of SvelteKit. And I'll do form dot missing. And then if that's true, then we can do something. So maybe p class, let's do text red 500, and then we'll do text 3XL, and we'll say all fields are required, and then I believe we need to do if. So if I did the right, it should work. So now if I just type in something here, but I missed the description, I can see here, all fields are required at the top. So obviously it's not quite right. And if I put the correct one in and hit enter, then it doesn't show. So now we've able to create just really basic form validation, passing it from the server to the client. All right, so I'm going to now create the back end. So the back end is going to use a GraphQL service called AppSync, and then we're going to use the API GraphQL to talk to that back end and grab the data. And I'll show you how that works. So if you're familiar with Supabase or Firebase, this is very similar. I'm going to use AWS Amplify to do this with something called Studio. So I'm going to log into the AWS console. If you don't have already an AWS account, I would highly recommend you get one. It's absolutely for free, and you can get the free tier. I'm going to go to AWS Amplify here. I'm going to create a new app. I'm going to do build an app. I'm going to call it to-do Svelte. And I'm confirm deployment, and then this will just take a moment. All right, so after you get to this screen, just click Launch Studio. And this will be like a graphical interface to create our back end, which will be able to create our database that we need to store our to-dos in. So I'm going to click on Data on the left-hand side. I'm going to click Add Model. I'm going to make this pretty simple. I'm going to call it To-Do. And then I'm going to add in 2 fields. I'm going to call it Task. And then I'm going to add in Description. And I'm just going to let this be defaulted and everything else. Now, right now, it's just going to be a public API. If I want to add in authorization rules, I can, but just for the sake of this demo, I'm going to leave it that way, and I'm just going to click Save and Deploy. While that's working, I'll just have to install a few plugins. I'm going to npm install AWS Amplify /CLI tag G. That's the Amplify command line utility. If you don't already have it installed, you need to do that. And then you'll need to install npmi AWS Amplify, which is the Amplify package if you don't already have it installed. And after you have that done, it's as easy as taking this string here, copying it, pasting it into the console, hitting enter, and this will create and pull down the information from the backend you just created into your local app. And it may make you log in like it's doing here. So I'm just going to click on yes. That will go ahead and connect up your CLI, and it'll ask you a few questions. I'm just going to hit enter through all this, and this will go ahead and pull everything down. All right. So now we have this, and you can see here we have a few new folders. We have this AWS Amplify folder. This has all the infrastructure for our backend in it if you ever need to look at that. And now in our source folder, we have this new AWS exports file, and that has the backend configuration that we just created. And it also has this models folder, which is really helpful because it has information about our GraphQL interface that we just created so we can talk to it, and I'll show you how that works. One thing we need to do, one more thing, is I like to have it code gen so it can create everything for our Amplify, GraphQL, AppSync models and everything. It'll code gen them all for us. So just remember on Amplify code gen configure. If I spell that right, Amplify code gen configure. And this will ask me a couple of questions. I want to do everything in TypeScript. Yep, that's going to make it GraphQL. Do you want to generate all the possible operations? Yes. 2 nested. It's also going to create this helper called API.ts, which I need. Do you want to generate code? Yes. So now it created a couple more files. It created this API.ts file, and it created this GraphQL folder with the mutation queries and subscription. And now I'll start the app. So now what we can do is we could do this a couple of different ways, and this is what's the power of Amplify is it's a front-end library, but it'll work on the back end too. So I can set this up that way I can load everything from the client side, but I think what I'm going to do is load it all on the back end side, on the server side, using the actions. And that has a couple of benefits. One of the benefits is now the bundle size of your app will be smaller because everything's going to be on the server and not on the client. And I feel like maybe just connecting to a database should be on the server side instead of the client side. So I think that's a better way to handle it. So now what I want to do in this app is I'm going to go back to the console. And what's a nice feature of this is I can create some dummy data. So before we add in the capability of creating data or creating our app, I'm just going to create some basic data. I'm going to come here. I'm going to go auto generate data. I don't know. Let's do 3. I can add some constraints if I want. And here it is. It's created some data with some dummy tasks and descriptions. They don't make any sense, but this is good because we'll be using this now. So I think the first thing we need to do is on the server is I want this load function, instead of just returning some nonsense, I want it to return the data from the GraphQL backend. We're going to use a couple of APIs, and I'll explain it as we go through. So we're going to first grab this API here, and we're going to destructure it, and it's going to be a type API class. And so let's add this in. So we can import in this class from, I think these are all from API class from AWS Amplify. Okay, that'll work for now. Now it's giving me a message that this is deprecated, but just for the sake of this demo, this will work fine. And it's not being used anywhere, but it will be used here in a second. So we'll go API class, and this will equal with SSR context. And what we can do here is, instead of having this event, we're going to destructure the request out of it. And then we're going to pass in this request. We'll go like this, request. And this is an object, I believe. Okay. So what this is saying is, since we're on the server, we're going to use this with SSR context. And this is just tells us when we're working on the server side with APIs, and you're using it, something like using in Next or in SvelteKit, this creates a server-side cookie, and it's kind of the recommended way of handling Amplify when you're using like these server routes. Now we have to configure Amplify too, so I'm going to import in AWS exports from, and that should be this file right here, and then I'm import in Amplify, and then I'm going to have to do an Amplify.configure, and I'll pass in the exports file. And I'm going to do this a little bit differently. We're going to spread the AWS exports file, and then we're going to add in this flag that says SSR true, and this will tell it that we're on the server side, as we did before. And now we're going to be able to do some GraphQL mutation. So if you're familiar with GraphQL, we're going to do queries. There's this lists. If we look inside our app, there is a query. There's a bunch of queries that we can grab. If we look inside this, let's see here, GraphQL queries. Yeah, there's a list to do. So that's what we want to do. So here's the syntax for that. I'm gonna walk through this. We're gonna grab data. We're gonna await it. So we definitely, yep, that should be good. We'll await. We're gonna do this API dot, and we have TypeScript here, GraphQL. And then we have some types in here. First, there's this GraphQL query, which we'll need to add in, which I guess I'll do right now. This is, I'll import the type. It's the GraphQL query from AWS Amplify API. And then from here, we have an internal, another generic here, which is a list. I believe it's a list to-dos query, and it automatically imported in. That's from the API. And then this is going to be an object, and this is, we're going to have a query here, and this query is going to be the list to-dos, which we're going to import in from GraphQL queries. And I think that will be it. And then we'll do a little check here. If the data dot list to-dos dot items doesn't exist, we're going to return, I think we're going to call an object called data. How about we call items? Items. And that's just going to have an empty array. But else, we're going to return. We're going to have this items. And that's going to have, well, let's do this. We'll do this, and this will be the data.listTodos.items. Okay. So what this is doing now is every time it loads, it's going to run this GraphQL query. It's going to pass in the list to dos. If it's empty, it's going to return an empty array. Otherwise, it's going to return the items in this array. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to go back to page.svelte. And then in the page.svelte, we need to do a each, for each. So one thing I kind of like to do as well is I could sort this. Let's see here. I'm going to create a filter. And this is going to equal the data.items. And then I'm going to do a .sort on it. And what I'm doing here is I kind of just want to make sure that they're in a certain order. We can do this inside the GraphQL query, but I just to prove a point with this filter, I just want to show you how it works. So in here we can do a dot, we'll do created at. Yep, is less than b dot created at. And then since it's a sort, we have to return either -1 or 0. And I think it's going to complain here because that could be null. So I'm going to just do it like this. And so now I'm going to create a filter here. And this filter, I think, will be right under the to-dos. So we have this to-dos here. So I'll just have multiple forms for each one of these to-dos. So I will make it like this. I'll do each filter as post. And then this will be /each right here. And then instead of task name, I can do post, and it should auto does it for me. So this is the task. And then the description would be description. And there's an N at the end, right? Oh, did I misspell description? I might have. Oops. That's okay. Let's see if it works. So I'm going to go back to the app, localhost. I'm going to refresh it. So when it loads, okay, cool. Here are the 3 tasks I created. Here's the dummy data. So here they all are, and they're all appearing from the server, which is really cool. This is all like just working magically on the server, and I'm just grabbing it from our API. So I think the next thing to do is to see if we can get this create work and delete work. So here we go. So I'm going to go into this create and add some things in it. So for the sake of time, I think I'm going to copy and paste some of this from my other screen, and then I'll talk to you over it, how it works. Okay, so I'm once again, let's see here. Once again, I'm using this SSR context to grab the data. I could probably pull this out from both of these and put it at the top as like a global, but just for now, I'll leave them in both. It's going to grab the data. I'm going to grab the description, and I think I called this task. It's going to grab the description and task. If it fails, it's going to do a 400, and it's going to pass the name and task. I guess in this case, yeah, the name is right here. Otherwise, it's going to use this create to do, which I'm going to import in from API. And this should be not called name. I think I'm going to rename this to task. Task. And then this should be task. And then I'm just doing a little refactoring here. Okay, so we have a task here, and then it says description, which I guess I forgot the O. So we'll do description. I think this is still an N there. And then this should be description. And so there, this is live coding here. Okay. So now I have this to-do details, which does this create to do. I'm passing in the task, which is the name of it, and the description. This is coming directly from the forms. And then I'm doing this create QL query, which I'm going to import this create to do's mutation. And then from here, we'll have create to do, and this mutation here, I think, is coming from here. Let's see here, create to do mutation. Here it is. So I imported in the create to do mutation. And these are just types that help with the typing. You don't have to add these, but they're helpful. So now I have a query input, and if everything goes well, it's a success. So now I have created my create, and let's test it out. If I come back over, well, let's add one other thing in here. Is this will submit it automatically, but I also want to show that error because I have this fail here, this task missing true. So let's see if we can do that. We already have this if form. I guess this is fine. We'll just leave this here. So let's create something. Let's say walk the dog around the park. We'll hit submit. Oops, this actually is called name. Let's go and delete all the items in here. So we'll start over again. We'll go here, delete all 3. And then we'll go ahead back to our app. We'll refresh it. And so now they're all gone. So let's see if we can add a new one. Let's go walking the dog down the way. We'll hit enter. Cool. And so now it's showing up. So let's see if we can add something in to delete this item. So on this list here, I have my create. So I'm just going to add a new one. It's going to be delete. I'm going to copy and paste this from the screen just to make this process a little quicker. And so what we're doing here is we're using SSR context again to grab our API. We're going to grab the form data. We're going to grab the ID this time. And then if there's no ID, we're just going to send missing true. And then we're going to create what we're sending over, which is this delete details. And this is the type delete to do input. And same thing here. I'm going to import this in from API. And this delete to do is importing from our mutations. So that should be it. By the way, one quick thing. If we look at the mutations, you'll notice here that this create to do, update to do, it actually returns everything. Same thing if you do any of our queries. Like if you're doing a list to dos, it returns every single thing. So obviously if this was in production, you may not want to return everything. One of the advantages of having AppSync is that you can just specify exactly what you want and get it back instead of having to get more than that. So this is just a real quick demo way of doing it. But if I was doing this in production, I'd probably create my own GraphQL queries. I'd use this to help me out, but also probably put in filters and limits and things like that, which is all built in to the Manage AppSync GraphQL service that's provided by AWS. So now we have this delete here. I think this is all we need because we go back to page.svelte and we look at this form here, this delete. Yeah, I think it should just do this to the /delete and it should do everything for us. So I'm going to try it again. Come back over here. I'm going to click delete. Oh, so the reason it's giving me an error is this input type here is that I want to pass in the value of this, which right now it's nothing. I just hard coded it in as 4, but I want the value to be the value inside here. So I can do post.id. I'm going to save it. So to delete items, we have to do a couple of different things. One is for this delete to do input, I need to add in this optional version and put the version number in. And one other thing too is that there's this concept of conflict resolution and offline capabilities. So since we're using Studio, it turns this option on by default, which is fine, but it works. Our API GraphQL is going to work a little differently. We actually have an update in the future that will actually make it so this option's turned off. Now you have to have conflict resolution on if you're using something called data store. So the way it works is when we delete things, things aren't completely deleted. They are deleted, but they're just added with this new column in the database called deleted. So to get this working correctly, we need to, for the post, if we look at this post right here, we have deleted. So what we can do is if post.deleted is not. So if it's deleted, then we don't want to show it. And then we'll put this right here. And what this will do is if the post is deleted, it won't show. Otherwise, it will show. So that way we don't accidentally try to delete it twice. And so that should work there. You can see here it's conflict resolution. So I'm going to try this again. I'm going to refresh it. I'm going to click delete. Cool. So now it's gone. Now, if we look back inside our app, so if we go back into the AppSync console, look at the data sources for it. and then go into the actual Explore table items, you'll see it here, and you'll see now deleted is true. And that's why it's not showing up anymore. If you don't have conflict resolution on, let's say you did this through the command line and not through Studio, then you won't have to worry about this. It'll actually delete it out of the database. But since we have this conflicts resolution, this is the way to do it. So that's a lot there. If you guys want me to deep dive in the differences between data store and our API GraphQL and how to handle both, leave a comment below. There's some nuances to it. It's pretty interesting, but it works great once you kind of understand what to do. Thank you so much for watching. And if you guys are interested in other AWS or SvelteKit videos, check this out now.